to major league players in Nigeria's democracy and the issues generated from its drive for growth and development. I am Ladi Akeredolu. Thanks for joining us. The federal government says, contrary to news reports, university staff are in fact enrolling in the IP's program for salary payments. It also says the impact of the newly passed finance bill on the economy will be positive given its provisions. My guest is the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed. Honorable Minister, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to Newsnight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ladi, for having me.
Now, the revenue and expenditure challenge that the country has, you have been quoted as saying, and I've heard you say so more than once, that we don't have a debt crisis or a debt problem. What we have is a revenue challenge. And some would say, aren't you playing with words there? Because if you are spending more than you're earning, you're going to end up in debt. Could you explain why you keep insisting that what we have is a revenue challenge and not a debt crisis?
Well, thank you very much. What we have is a revenue challenge. We do national plans and national budgets for both revenue as well as expenditure. So when we have a situation where our revenue is underperforming and therefore we're not able to meet all of our expenditure, including debt service, the problem is that of revenue. The level of borrowing we have today is significantly low compared to the size of our economy. The total revenue to GDP ratio is about 19%. The World Bank, the IMF, puts an economy of our size to be able to borrow up to 55%, and it is good. Because you don't have, you're not going to be able to, as a country, develop to the level you want by just internally generated revenues. You borrow to be able to grow now, to provide infrastructure that is needed to enable businesses to thrive, to make more income for themselves as well as pay taxes to government. So if we say we're going to wait until we generate revenue to build roads, to build rail, then our growth rate will be very, 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 very slow. So what we're doing to address the revenue challenges is encapsulated right now in a domestic revenue mobilization program that we named the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiatives. We have identified various revenue streams that we must focus on and assign responsibilities, and are currently also assigning revenue numbers that each revenue stream must realize. So because of the revenue crisis, we have debt service to revenue eating up a lot of the revenue that we make. So that is a problem. So again, I insist we don't have a debt problem. What we have is a revenue challenge, and we have put a lot of efforts in trying to address this revenue challenge.
Now, where does the general borrowing plan? I remember there was a borrowing plan that was submitted to the National Assembly, the 8th National Assembly.
Yes, yes.
And I've read since this new one, or it was resubmitted to the 9th Assembly, a number of varying reports across the media. Some are saying, well, it's a continuation of part of what was approved by the 8th Assembly. Some are saying that, well, it's a brand new plan. Others are saying that it's 30 billion naira, it's $30 billion, it's $3 billion. And I remember when you were at the IMF World Bank meeting earlier on, you did talk about some $3 billion World Bank loan. So I'm thinking maybe this is where some of the confusion arose. Could you please enlighten us on exactly what this borrowing plan is and how does it fit into what you said earlier?
So by the provisions of our laws, the federal government, or indeed the state governments, cannot borrow without approval of the parliament. So traditionally, we would put together our projections of loans that we need to take, both at the federal as well as the state level, and take it to the National Assembly for approval. The last set that was taken, the borrowing plan for 2016 to 2018, was not approved as a package. What the National Assembly did is they picked a few and approved, but largely the plan was not approved. But because the 8th National Assembly has gone and that was not approved, what we have to do is to resubmit, because the Parliament informs us that once a law, an approval is not made, you have to refresh your request. So that's the process in which we're doing. But in giving approval, the Parliament, the way they work, and expectedly so, is to take each loan item and interrogate whether the case that is made for it is adequate. So some of what I've seen in the papers is it didn't come with any detailed breakdown
of projects and how
projects.
much is to each
So
one.
the Ministry of Finance has not resubmitted yet. We have had engagement with the National Assembly. They made it clear to us that we have to resubmit the plan. And the process of resubmitting the plan is for the ministry to review and report back to the President of what has been passed and amended and the status, and approved by the Assembly, and what is still outstanding, so that the President can resubmit the request to the National Assembly. And the President could decide there's no need to just resubmit it at 2016, 2018. We just submit the current need of the country in terms of borrowing for both the federal government as well as the states.
Now, it's good you mentioned that, and one detail that was available, and I want you to confirm if that is also true, is that it was associated with 39 projects in all, in power, roads, and rail. I mean, the original plan. You've talked now about the President and the fact that they picked some of the items and there will be outstanding items. Why is there a focus on these three areas?
Because investment in infrastructure is very important. And the investment that we need to make in infrastructure is large. So you can't do that by just revenues from government. We need to borrow. And when you analyze our borrowing, you find that most of these large ticket infrastructure items are funded through low-cost loans, which are largely concessionary loans from multilateral institutions, most of them sub 3%. So we're not borrowing to spend on recurrent expenditure, we're borrowing to invest in capital, which will in itself provide the environment to enhance government's revenue and enhance our capacity to pay.
Now, is the proposed increase in VAT also part of this big plan?
Not related to the borrowing.
Not related to the revenue side?
Yes, to improve the revenue for the nation, not just for the federal government. You know, VAT is a consumption tax, and by our laws, 85% of the VAT revenue is due to the states and the local government. So federal government gets just 15%. When we're negotiating the national minimum wage, and 30,000 naira was agreed, the President set up a special committee to review the federal government and the state's ability to pay and find ways and means that these payments can be made in a manner that is sustainable. So this committee made a report in different sources, advising the President on different sources of funds. One of the advice that they gave was to increase VAT. And we have provided for the increase of the VAT in the finance bill. Thankfully, both houses of the National Assembly have now passed the finance bill. The process will be they do a harmonization and send it to the President for assent. The beneficiaries, in terms of revenue, of the VAT increase is largely the states and the local governments. The amount that will come from the incremental amount for the VAT for the federal government is under 100 billion. So it's not very significant to us, but it's significant to the states. And in terms of growth and development, we have a responsibility to look nationally, not just address the needs of the federal government alone, but also address the needs of the states.
Where are we with the issue of the states' loans when they were in crisis, most of them? And there was a repayment clause. And when the federal government triggered that repayment clause, the debtors, I'm sorry to use that word, but the debtor states were up in arms. And from what we hear, the federal government bent over backwards, renegotiated, spread the payments over a much, and still the states said no.
Well, the states are paying these loans. The agreement we made is that we deduct the repayments from their FAC allocations and pay to the and pay the loans. And we've started for all there are 4 different categories of loans. All of them are being repaid now by the states.
So they've agreed to repay, and
they have agreed that it's important to start repayment, and we also agreed with them when we did the first tranche that the volume of deduction was high. So the central bank and us did a renegotiation to extend the repayment period from 20 years to 30 years, making it less. So the monthly cost for them is reduced.
Now, we've been talking a lot about debt, expenditure, and so on. You mentioned the minimum wage. Of course, the states are now in the process of negotiating with their own workers what to pay, but the federal government has reached an agreement with its own workers. How are you going to pay?
We are paying. We started paying the minimum wage in August to the workers that are entitled to the minimum wage. We have concluded the negotiation on the consequential adjustment. So when you change the minimum wage, there are adjustments that need to be made to maintain parity for other levels of public servants. We've finished that negotiation. When we did the 2019 budget, we had anticipated the cost of the minimum wage as well as the cost of consequential adjustment. So we have provisions to pay for both. And we have been paying already the minimum wage. What we now have to do is to pay the arrears of the consequential adjustment, because the minimum wage payment and arrears has been done. It's supposed to take, it took effect from April. We started paying in August. We paid the 1 month in August, and in September we paid the arrears from April for the minimum wage. So we're in the process of paying the arrears, the arrears on respect of the consequential adjustment.
Now, before I talk about those who are finding it a bit difficult to adjust, where are we with IPIS?
IPIS implementation has made tremendous progress. We have most of the agencies of government on IPIS, including the Nigerian military and the police. We have the last batch of 5 of the security agencies, which they are not large in number, but they are also doing the enrollment now. We have federal polytechnics completely done. We have colleges of education, some of them done, some the capture process is ongoing as we speak. We have staff out in the field. We have the universities currently undergoing the capture as well.
The universities?
Yes. Despite what you hear in the media, our staff are out there doing this capture. So I read what I hear, what I see in the papers, and we just go on with the work. We don't believe in making a lot of noise. We just do the work. But at the end of the day, as our staff are out in the field, if they come back to report that there is any of the institutions or any of the staff that refuse to be captured, then we will stop those salaries. We were to stop salaries in October, but because the capture was taking long, because you have to go to every institution, you have to see every staff, you have to document them and do the capture, it was ongoing, we didn't implement. But we're at the stage now where we can say, okay, it is very clear there's this institution or that institution that is not cooperating, then we'll stop there. But universities have been captured as well, as we speak.
Now, well, I was going to ask that, but you've answered it already, so I think maybe, in the case of the TSA, it seems as if, again, reading from what we're reading, it seems as if that's a bit more problematic. not all agencies have been put on the TSA, have complied with the TSA. It would appear as if some were even granted exemptions.
All agencies are on the TSA except the ones that Mr. President granted special exemptions on. And the exemptions are largely around companies that government is in partnership with the private sector. For example, a good number of NMPC's operating arrangements where Nigeria as a government is represented by NMPC in partnership with the IOCs or other ventures. Those ones are outside of the TSA. But we have also information on them. We have information on their transactions through the NMPC and the central bank. The essence of the TSA is not to hinder private business. So where government has set itself out to go into private business and they have partnership with non-government actors, those accounts were clearly exempted from TSA. But as we speak, periodically we get information through our whistleblower policy of funds that are found in commercial bank that do not fall under that exemption category. And we're able to capture them, move the funds, and bring them into the TSA.
Now, for laymen like us, there's a bit of confusion. Now I know what IPIS means. But then there were a number of other systems that were being put in place. One does not know whether those were payment systems, as in salary payment systems like IPIS is, or if they were specifically designed for other purposes. Could you enlighten us on that?
Okay, so IPIS is the Integrated Personal Payroll Management System. That's where the government salaries are paid. But we also have the GIFMIS, which is a Government Integrated Financial Management Information System, where all government agencies that are funded by government undertake their expenditure. So that this expenditure are now expenditure for recurrent purposes as well as for capital. So when budgets are made, we upload the budget for every agency into the GIFMIS system, and that's where they spend from. So when we release funds, we credit their accounts in the GIFMIS. So they raise their payments on the GIFMIS system. And what the GIFMIS enables us to do is to be able to see all government transactions and to be able to draw reports of government transactions from GIFMIS. The exception is of agencies that are outside of the country that are not yet on the GIFMIS. So we're now in the process of trying to create an automated platform also for them to be able to carry through their transactions so that we can have visibility. And, and also on the TSA side, the foreign agencies that are outside of the country, foreign missions largely, are not on the TSA. So they open accounts whichever country they are, and then they periodically remit revenues that they collect to a JP Morgan account, and then it's transferred into the TSA. So we're looking at how to create a TSA-like process for foreign missions that will enable them put their revenues onto that system as well as enable us see also their expenditure.
So now, as finance minister or the president or indeed anybody else who is in the financial management chain, you can actually sit at your desk and you can see the inflow, outflow, how much government has, how much it is spending at any point in time.
Yes, that's the importance of the TSA.
Now, let me dovetail it back now and ask a little bit about some other things that are currently happening. The reports that we're hearing are again a bit mixed. There are people who are saying, well, local producers are benefiting a lot from the closure. There are others who are saying, well, legitimate importers have suffered. Where you're sitting, what do you see?
What it is Nigeria finally trying to rein in all the things that are happening between ourselves and our neighbors across our borders. We have signed up to the Africa Continental Free Trade Zone. The fact is, the market in Africa is the market in Nigeria. So if we don't put enough controls, we will end up being a dumping ground. We will end up having a situation whereby goods come from outside of the region, passing through our neighbors, and they end up through in Nigeria. We have made commitments between ourselves and our neighbors to comply to some certain principles that are encapsulated in protocols. Those principles are what we're seeking to enforce. One of the principles is that, okay, you can bring in goods through any of our neighboring countries, but there are transshipment rules that need to be respected. So when you bring in a container, the container is supposed to come to Nigeria sealed and escorted by the customs officers of our neighboring country. But that's not what is happening. The containers are opened, the goods are rebagged, and they trickle in through various means, including illegally through our borders. And it's hurting our economy. And as a government, we have a responsibility to our neighbors, but we also have a greater responsibility to the citizens of Nigeria. So when you have encouraged investors locally to invest in farming, to invest in processing of goods that are found in Nigeria, and then you sit back, you allow smuggling and lack of respect to protocols to destroy the investment that your citizens have done. It's not responsible governance. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that the protocols are respected, and the best time for us to do it is now. When the AFCFTA effect opens up, the goods will come, but we need to make sure that the rules are respected.
And the feedback that you have from local manufacturers, those who are said to be benefiting, because those who I've spoken to and who talk about this say, well, okay, if the local manufacturers are benefiting, then of course they'll buy more raw materials, they employ more people, and they'll pay more taxes. Yes. So the government earns more. Is that what you're already seeing? Because the border has been closed now for a bit of time.
What we're seeing now is that, and I'll give you an example. One of the major products that is imported into our country or dumped into our country is rice. But on the other hand, this government has paid special attention to that crop and enabled a lot of farmers to go back to the farming rice, enabled very large rice mills to spring up and are producing. There was a point when rice mills were shutting down because they had excess products in their warehouses that are not being sold. Why? Because there was cheaper rice coming into the market. This is rice that is substandard. This is rice that in the countries, the original countries where this rice is coming from, they are expired rice that are not even fit for human consumption. They are not even fit to feed to their animals. But they will be brought into the region through our neighboring countries, rebagged and labeled as if they are manufactured there and then sent into Nigeria. It was hurting the businesses of the rice millers and the rice farmers. What we've seen since the closure is, and I had interacted with some of these millers, there was 2 weeks into the border, one of the major millers said they have rice orders for up to February 2020, and they have asked their banks to stop collecting money because the orders were very high. So that is how quickly the impact is. The rice millers are producing to capacity. They are looking at expansion. The poultry farmers are struggling to meet the supply of eggs and poultry. That is good for businesses in Nigeria. This means that there will be more jobs created. This means productivity will increase. This means local businesses will now be able to pay more taxes to government. And that is what is more sustainable.
Now, there have been people who have suggested that in order to make Nigerian manufacturers and industries more competitive, apart from what government is doing with the issue of borders and more enforcement about protocols and so on, that perhaps the government should consider a devaluation of the Naira.
Devaluation of the Naira is not something that is in the books right now. What we've done to be able to encourage industry, especially small, medium-sized industry, is to reduce taxes. In the finance bill, if you've checked, we have proposals, and from my understanding, both houses have passed this finance bill to reduce taxes for small, medium enterprises from 30% to 20%. We've also introduced exemptions for industries, for very small industries that have turnover of less than 25 million from payment of taxes. We've, despite the increase in the VAT, we have introduced a VAT threshold that for a company that has a turnover of 25 million, you don't have to register for VAT, which means your goods will not be suffering VAT. And we introduced a VAT threshold that the transactions that will attract VAT have to be transactions that are from 10,000 naira and above.
That is those who are using POSs. And
yes,
so
yes.
yeah, because I want you to expand on that.
So the whole of that is made such that you make it easier for small businesses to grow, and also you protect the poor and the vulnerable members of society from carrying the burden of VAT. There has been more emphasis on exemptions, which include food, medicines, educational. There's a long list of exemptions. You can check the VAT Act, you will see them. The VAT will be on goods that are manufactured and consumed in Nigeria, and is meant to be on, I don't want to say the word luxury, but it's designed in such a way that the consumption of the poor and the vulnerable are not affected.
I want you to expand on the one you touched on briefly.
On the
electronic
payments.
The electronic. There are people who are talking about the fact that government is trying to encourage people to use less cash and to pass through the electronic system. But what we see is that some of those who are in the chain, who are using the electronic payments, the POSs and so on, are imposing fees on transactions. Even of 1,000 naira, you want to buy fuel onto an Okada, 400 naira fuel, they say 50 naira.
So these provisions of the finance bill have not taken effect. People are doing this out of turn, and unfortunately in Nigeria, everything government tries to do, there's somebody running ahead and trying to take undue advantage. They're taking undue advantage of people. The VAT, the changes that are in the finance bill, when they are approved, will only take effect from January 2020. So whatever people are doing now, they're doing it out of turn. But remember that there are charges that, POS charges that are imposed by the service providers, and this includes telecom operators. So that's not a government tax. It's some fees that the telecom operators, I think they call it USSD charges, that the telecom operators are charging. So it's not government imposed taxes. The telecom operators are providing service to these outlets, and they're taking a fee for provision of that service. So that's not VAT.
Some of them are hiding under stamp duty.
The stamp duties, is on transfers within the financial system. So if I make a payment to your account, I'm charged 15 naira. We have been paying the stamp duties. If you check every transaction, that's the stamp duties. And the stalemate on the stamp duties was who was going to be responsible for collecting. Is it NIPOS or
CBN or FIRS?
No, or FIRS. It's between NIPOS. It's collected within the banking system. But the responsible collecting agency we have put in the finance bill should be FIRS, because it's a tax at the end of the day. Regardless of the fact that it's called stamp duties, it's a tax.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with stamps, actually.
It's not with stamp. It has nothing to do with stamp.
Okay, so that's been resolved. I mean, if the finance bill has been passed by both houses of the assembly now, and it's just awaiting transmission to the president for assent, we can then take it that FIRS will start collecting and it will be treated in the administration process.
So
like
we have to discuss how the process will work, because there's areas that are built up, some within the banking system, the commercial banks, some are with the central bank. So we now have to sit down and streamline the processes of collection between the all the agencies that are involved.
Now, if I follow that logic properly, that would also mean that all those collected so far and that are in the banking system and on other places,
we should be able to recover them. Those are revenues due to government.
Now, it brings me to something else which I'm looking at, and so many people will be interested in. You were thanked by a number of pensioners, principally Nigeria Airways pensioners, when you first became Minister of Finance, because they were outside the office here for quite a while. And you stepped out of your way to help them. Taking that as the peg, what is the status report now with the general issue of payments of pensions and gratuities to those who are supposed to be paid, especially those who are under the old system, not the contributory pension scheme? Where are we with that?
Well, what we've been able to do, and through an agency that we call PITAD, is that we have been able to form a routine of paying monthly pensions. But there are still problems of some back arrears that are due. And some of these areas, for example, let me take you back to the minimum wage. Part of the consequential adjustment also means that there will be adjustments relating to pensions as well.
Okay, even with the minimum wage?
Yes, yes. So there are arrears that are due to different categories of pensioners that we are struggling to pay. So whenever we have pooled enough resources, we pay. The same thing will happen again due to this minimum wage increment. But for the biggest size of pensioners, what we made sure is that we're paying them what is due as a matter of routine, so that is taken care of. Whenever we have resources that we're able to pull together, we now address part of the arrears. I hear pensioners saying, you need to pay us arrears. I say, where's the money going to come from? At best, the president said, at least give a pensioner a monthly pension that they can bank on, that they can plan against. And we're making sure we're doing that on a consistent basis.
Would you at any point consider the kind of idea that some in the private sector would take a look at? I mean, if I was a federal government pensioner and if I lived to be 80, but I retired at 50, for 30 years I would be due pensions under the old system. Mm-hmm. And if I was entitled to 20 million over the 30-year period as accumulation, not counting this, you pay me a lump sum of 7 million and I give up my rights to the balance.
Nice, but I don't have the 7 million to pay you now.
So that would then...
So that's the point. So because the numbers are large, right? The number of people that are affected are large. So this lump sum payments, desirable as they are, we actually contemplated that. And when we went to the 8th Assembly to ask for an exception to allow us to address these areas using a debt instrument like promissory notes, but by a Fiscal Responsibility Act, that is not allowed. But we still went and said, if you make an exception for us to be able to settle this pension arrears, so it will be something we'll have done once and for all, and then we know that we'll now be faced with just the monthly run rates.
Of the ones who are currently...
Yes, but the law says you can't borrow to pay a recurrent expenditure, and this is recurrent expenditure. The Fiscal Responsibility Act clearly says you can't borrow to use it for recurrent expenditure. But we asked if they can give an exception for us to settle those pension arrears using promissory notes. And the National Assembly, in their wisdom, which is not a bad wisdom, by the way, turned that down. Okay, so it means now...
Their full payment.
No, it means now the only option we have is we have to pay from government's internally generated revenue. Revenues are short. We're just trying to make sure that we pay salaries, we pay pensions, and we're able to do government recurrent expenditures. So we don't have extra revenues to be able to pay arrears of those nature. So that's where we are right now. So we do some we do some attrition and collect gradually, and when it gets to a certain size, we take a proportion and pay. But we're not able to pay everybody's needs at the same time.
Yeah, that would be most welcome news for those who are listening to you, especially those who are pensioners. As we're winding this down, Honorable Minister, I want you to take one big elephant that most people refuse to talk about. Some have argued that government would have a lot more revenue if this fuel subsidy, recovery, and so on budget was tinkered with. You're Minister of Finance, so I know you know this more than anyone else. But then government is also said to be owing even those who are doing the subsidizing, and I do my hand like this deliberately because there are also issues on that level. How did you solve that problem? Because it was there when you became Minister of Finance.
Are you talking about fuel subsidy?
No, the payments to marketers who did the supplying.
Okay. Also, we collated the information on how much is being owed to the fuel marketers. We went to the National Assembly, and the National Assembly gave approval, but they were doing that in batches. And for the ones that have been approved, we have been able to settle them using promissory notes. So promissory notes are debt instruments that is saying, I'm giving you this debt instrument, and in the next 2 years or 5 years, I'll pay off the full amount. But the advantage of the promissory note is you can now, as the owner, you can now go to a bank and discount that instrument. So in discounting it, you are getting less than the full face value, and the bank that is discounting it will not get the benefit of the spread.
Of the spread,
yes,
and then eventually
the
full payment.
So we started already, and we have paid most of what we are owing the fuel marketers. After we paid the main bills, there was this demands about, because of the time, the delay in the time, interest costs had built up. There was also the matter of exchange rate differential. So we're addressing them in bits and pieces. The good thing is that regime had stopped. We're not continuing the build-up of fuel subsidy debts.
That means, government is dealing with NNPC
Yes,
only, which it owns, and therefore it's a question of money transfers between government
Well,
and the agency.
the scheme changed in the sense that NNPC is incurring all the expense and deducting the expense from revenue that they generate on behalf of government, and then before remitting to the Federation.
You're an accountant. Do you think that's tidy? Given the fact that the law says that they should first of all submit their expenses to you for scrutiny, and then only then get their money back.
The NNPC Act gives NNPC the responsibility to operate the oil and gas business on behalf of the Federation. And the Act makes a provision that they should, when they generate revenue, they should also take out their expenses. So that is what NNPC is doing. So they're operating within their Act.
Now, finally, as we look into 2020, as is always the case, the beginning of every year, people make New Year resolutions at the personal level, but at the government level, then you make projections. With all what we've talked about, that you have expatiated on the expectations and the hopes and so on, in 2020, how do you see Nigeria's economy unfolding? What would you tell manufacturers, civil servants, importers to expect? Because again, there are speculations around that it's going to be a difficult year, it's going to be tight, government is looking for money, and therefore it will squeeze everybody until they squeak. Taxes are going to go up, VAT and so on, and that is out there.
So that's very interesting. But what is also out there is a finance bill. Have you seen the finance bill?
I have.
Okay. So you will know that we had like 83 recommendations in the finance bill, only one of them is an increase. Everything else is adjustments to close loopholes, palliatives to ensure that the weak businesses and the weaker citizens are protected. There is no, and also decrease in taxes. I said earlier on, we're reducing the tax rate for small, medium enterprises from 30% to 20%. So there's no increase in taxes. So sorry, there is one, which is, it's not an increase, it's a removal of withholding tax exemption that was granted on dividends from oil and gas business. So if you invest in the capital market and you earn dividends, if you check your dividend slip, there's a withholding tax of 10%. Mm-hmm. But if the investment is oil and gas, there's none. So we're saying, okay, this was supposed to be an incentive for the oil and gas, for investors to invest in the oil and gas industry. But this is an industry that is now old, is matured. So this invested needs to go. And so that, if you want, is an introduction, but it's actually just removal of an exemption that has stayed for too long.
I can't fail to ask this. Budget. So many people are waiting for the 2020 budget. Do you foresee a situation where this time you'll have it smoother? Because what we've had in the past, first, apart from delay, is the question of changes, and sometimes very large changes to things like the benchmark prices and so on that determine revenue and expenditure. What do you see happening this time around? Are you engaging better? Is the process easier for you as Minister of Finance?
It's been a very good process. We have a National Assembly that is very supportive of the executive. They understand that we are one and the same government and that we have the common goal of serving people. So this budget process it's been well arranged, it's been well organized. The cooperation levels have been extremely good. We sent an MTEF, and the National Assembly, in amending the MTEF, had discussions with us before changing the price from 55 to 57. They had their reasons, and we conceded. They also had an adjustment in increasing customs revenue from 900 billion to 1.5 billion. They had their reasons, we agreed. The budget defense process that has that we went through, it went very well. The Assembly also said we also have important projects in our zones. You need to make sure it's in the budget.
Are we referring to constituency?
No, zonal projects.
Okay.
Zonal projects. And where the projects complement the priorities of government, we took them in. So we don't expect that the National Assembly will bring back the budget the way we submitted it, because that's not the process of appropriation. We expect that during the appropriation that some improvements are done. That's the separation of responsibilities that our Constitution anticipated, but we don't expect some drastic changes as we used to have in the past.
There are those who say that once you've got the budget, the president signs onto it. It now becomes your baby for implementation. People like us, and I mean journalists and others, go after those to whom allocations have been made. Mm-hmm. And usually their defense is that, well, yes, that's what's in the budget, but have you asked how much was released?
Okay, so, Mr. Ladi, in 2019, by half year, our revenue performance was 58%. So literally what that means is you're not going to be able to fund anybody 100% when the aggregate revenue performance is 58%. So the revenue shortfall means you're not able to fund your budget to the levels at which you planned, and therefore agencies are not able to execute to the levels at which they planned. That's why our most important task is raising revenues. And it's not by increase of taxes, as evidenced by the finance bill. It's increasing tax efficiency and expanding the tax. And so we're going to be chasing people to say, come and pay your taxes. We're going to be chasing people to say, this tax you have paid is an underpayment. You have to pay the difference. Nigerians in general don't feel that responsibility as in other domains, that as a citizen I have a responsibility to pay my taxes. The people that pay just pay it grudgingly. But majority of Nigerians
Or they are
feel
captured because
they don't have a choice.
Yes, there's
like
removed
like
before
this,
they receive anything.
like the civil servant. But majority of people just feel there's nothing wrong with not paying your taxes.
But don't you
But
think that
there's a history behind that.
I was going to say, don't you think there's a link between payment of tax and willingness and the ability to see what your tax is going to
Yeah,
be
but
used
you see there's a history of that. We were essentially a rent-seeking state. Once we abandoned agriculture and mining and we found oil and gas, and there was enough revenue to form the successive governments didn't bother to press the citizens for taxes. And symbiotic relationship now. When the government is not forcing you to pay your taxes, you also feel you don't have any obligation to ask government, what are you using this money for? So where citizens actually pay their taxes, they will be asking what you use their money for. So as we're moving away from dependence on the oil and gas revenues and moving more to oil and gas revenues and holding citizens to undertake their responsibility of paying taxes, you will see that the call for accountability will increase. And once the call for accountability increase, it makes government more accountable and more responsive.
The House of Reps is trying to pass a law now that stipulates that every budget must have 40% capital budget component. Is that going to be beneficial to someone in your position?
I think it's always good to have an incentive to do more. We set targets for revenue collecting agencies. The targets themselves are supposed to be an incentive for them to do more. In the ERGP, we set a target for ourselves that we are going to make sure that capital spending is at least 30%. But we struggled in 2019 because you have to have the revenues to be able to do the capital, because our law says that you cannot borrow to do recurrent expenditure. Our recurrent expenditure is so high, and it has the negative effect of reducing our capacity to invest in the real developmental sector, which is providing more for capital.
Honorable Minister, on that note, I say thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ladi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's News Night tonight. Thanks for being with us. I am Ladi Akiri Dunduale. Goodbye.